Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Mets Daily on the Fan Arch Network. John Saponaro here with you today and every day to talk about our New York Mets. But of course, before we get started, a shout out goes to our friends over at Kalshi for sponsoring the video for a limited time. Use the code FANARCHBASEBALL on the Kalshi app to get $10 when you trade 10. And I should mention, if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, especially now in the trading season with just a few days left to go before the MLB trade deadline. You want to make sure that you are subscribed. You want to make sure your notifications are on so that you know when a new episode is going to drop, because you never know what's going to happen this time of year for Major League Baseball. In that same spirit, there was no Mets game yesterday. They get rained out, and I guess it's not really a surprise if you live in the New York area. Bad weather was kind of blowing through, and we saw it in the Mets-Braves game a couple nights ago where there was some threatening of some stoppages. There was some lightning off in the distance and all of that. Mets went ahead and called this game early. Good on them for getting that done, preventing people from getting out to this game. And what we are left with is a doubleheader today, split admission doubleheader, a 1:10 start and then a 7:10 start. So we'll take a moment and talk about how this day is going to shake out. Now, if this was a regular season, if this was a season where the Mets were fighting for their playoff lives and a game like this against the Braves super mattered, we talk about the difficulty of splitting, or excuse me, the importance of splitting a doubleheader at the very least because of the difficulty of trying to sweep a doubleheader. But of course, we are not in that situation, are we, as Mets fans? So we'll just look at some of the interesting things that stand out over the course of the next two games that you're going to see today. If you're home from work, if you're off from work, if you have an atypical schedule, you'll have two opportunities at least to watch some Mets baseball. And depending on your feeling on this season and the team, that might be a gift or a curse. But either way, you're hanging out with us here at Mets Daily, so I appreciate that. So as scheduled, now remember I'm recording this the night before, looks like the afternoon game is going to be A.J. Smith-Shawver versus Sean Manaea. A.J. Smith-Shawver is making his first start of 2026. He's a 23-year-old. He's got a career 4-2 record with a 3.77 ERA, so not too bad. The whip a little bit worse at 1.30, but that's a very, very, very small sample size for a young pitcher. 74 innings pitched. But later on in the nightcap, you are going to get the matchup that we talked a little bit about on our last show, which is Chris Sale versus Christian Scott. And that's the one that you really want to circle. And again, if the Mets were playing in a season where every game mattered, if the Mets were playing in a season where you're fighting for the division, you're fighting for the wild card, you got to stack these wins, you'd say, look, Christian Scott's been great, but go out and beat the young kid in the afternoon game. Take all the pressure off you going up against Chris Sale, because that's going to be the tougher matchup. Sale's having a great year. Sale's tough on the Mets. Lefties are tough on the Mets this season. That would be the one that you don't want to have to win. But again, everything is gravy. Everything is cake with the New York Mets. So we'll see how this doubleheader works out. We'll see if the Mets play fast and loose. We'll see if the Mets play relaxed, especially coming off of a 14-run barrage from a couple days ago. But Chris Sale, 11-6, 2.19 ERA, 134 strikeouts. He has been absolutely phenomenal. And Christian Scott, 3-2, with a 3.13 ERA and 78 Ks. So that is the slate of games that you can expect later on today. And with that being said, you guys watching this a couple hours before game one throws the first pitch, I appreciate you being here using Mets Daily as sort of your pregame show into the doubleheader of Mets baseball. Little bit of a shorter show today because we don't have a ton to discuss with no game last night, so we'll kind of get through some of these topics a little bit on the quicker side. But of course, Pete Alonso back in the news because Mike Puma reported in an article that was behind a paywall, which I absolutely cannot stand. Mike Puma doesn't tweet, doesn't say anything on social media for 3 or 4 days, and then all of a sudden he comes up with this quotable headline from Francisco Lindor, and I'm not saying it's made up, I'm just saying Mike Puma is very frustrating in this regard, and you can see it underneath my smiling face. Francisco Lindor said, "We all miss Pete." And again, that was part of a larger article where it was talked about David Stern's missteps in the offseason and where the clubhouse is and the leadership and where Lindor stands and all of this stuff. To be honest with you, I could only make some inferences on this article because I will not pay any of these news publications to get behind their paywall. I absolutely refuse, especially when it's to read people like Mike Puma, John Heyman, Joel Sherman, and the like, not when Laura Albanese and Abby Mastracco and Will Salmon are all putting out such better articles and such better coverage of the New York Mets for you to read than any of these other folks. So I'm not going to pay for the stuff to get behind the paywall, but the inferences I could make from the article that I could preview and the replies in the tweets and everything else is that's basically was the premise of this article. And I want to take two things away from this. One, if you don't know me, I am a big-time Pete Alonso fan. I had defended Pete Alonso ferociously when he was here. I wanted Pete Alonso back when they re-signed him a year ago. I wanted Pete Alonso back when they chose not to re-sign him, although I did understand why they chose not to give him that deal. If I ran the Mets, I would have given him the Baltimore deal. I've said that before. I will continue to say that. It may not age well. Even in this first year, it's not really looking so great for Alonso as he's on track to have one of his worst offensive seasons, if not the worst offensive season of his career. But I'm not going to go back now and change what I said. I would have given him the deal because Steve Cohen and the Mets have a ton of money. And who cares what that deal looks like in 3 years or whatever the case may be. But I understood why they didn't do it. But I will say this. The biggest issue with the Mets moving on from Pete Alonso was not Pete Alonso himself. It was who they decided to go with to replace him. And if you tell me that Jorge Polanco is the guy, I don't even have a huge issue with that, save for the fact that Jorge Polanco is always injured. I don't care that he's never played first base before. I think he could have figured that out as a guy who played second and short and third in his major league career. But he's always injured. And he came off of a relatively healthy season a year ago. So you look at it and you say, well, what are the odds of him being healthy again? And you kind of just shrug your shoulders. They also went out and added Luis Robert Jr., both of whom were supposed to play a massive role on this 2026 Mets team. And again, you're relying on a lot of health from two guys who have not been the picture of health, especially when you're trying to replace a guy in Alonso who has been the definition of health over his major league career, playing in 160 and 161 and 162 and 159 games, basically year in and year out. So the thought process of how you pivot to try to fill that void. And look, I know from an offensive standpoint, neither one of those guys was the Alonso replacement. It was more Bo Bichette. But when you look at trying to fill out the offense and fill out who's going to bat fourth and who's going to bat fifth, sixth, whatever, you start to see that, well, Luis Robert and Jorge Polanco were penciled into those spots on opening day because they have the talent to do it. They have the ability to do it, but do they have the availability to do it? So I think that was a big problem here in the Pete Alonso decision, was not the decision to move on, but where they went after that, especially when there were individuals like Ryan O'Hearn, who went to Pittsburgh on a free agent deal, who is a first baseman, who has played all season, who's had a good year. That's not going to be sexy. It's not going to excite you. Ryan O'Hearn's kind of like a rich man's Jared Young, but he's a guy who you could have banked on a bit better. The Mets chose not to go in that direction. Now, maybe they thought they were too left-handed. Ryan O'Hearn's a left-handed hitter. That's a fair point. Jorge Polanco's a switch hitter. But to that, I say, well, what about Contreras, who was traded from St. Louis to the Red Sox? This is a guy who, again, plays a lot, and it plays good defense when you're talking about this run prevention. He's turned himself into a very good first baseman. Now, he's not Alonso. He's going to hit you more like 20-some-odd home runs, but he's a clutch hitter. He fit that mold of what they were trying to build with the likes of Jorge Polanco and Bo Bichette, this kind of not all or nothing type hitter. And he was available. We know that because he was traded in the offseason. Now, did the Red Sox make an offer that was just too good for St. Louis to refuse? I don't know, because I wasn't there. I wasn't on the phone. Did the Mets kick the tires on it and they didn't want to match the deal? I have no idea. But the bottom line is there were folks that were available or that were traded that would have been a safer, smarter, better investment than what they did with Jorge Polanco. And I'll add one to the mix. And there's a caveat on this guy because I don't know if he's truly available. There's a lot of whispers that he was. And that is Christian Walker, who signed a multi-year deal with Houston Last season, he was not good in the first half. He didn't hit home runs. He didn't hit for a high average. He didn't even play defense. Some things that he has been good at basically his entire career since his breakout. But if you look in the second half of the season last year, Christian Walker's numbers started to tick up. They started to get more in line with what his career norms have been. And he even started playing good defense again. And this is a guy that, yeah, maybe Houston didn't want to move him. But I think Houston is the kind of team, as this mid-market team that likes to play kind of musical chairs with their contracts, they might have been a team that you could call and you could say, hey, look, we'll take Christian Walker and his 20 some odd $1 million this year off your hands, and we'll give you back player X, prospect X, and that'll help you take that $20 million and reinvest it elsewhere, because that's been a big part of how they've run their organization. So I don't know that he was fully available. I'm not sure if he was available at all, but I do think that would have been another avenue to go to replace Pete Alonso if you weren't going to bring Pete Alonso back with a player that would have been a little bit more of a bankable commodity than Jorge Polanco. The last thing I'll say about this is Lindor said everyone misses Alonso. Lindor has been made out to be this scapegoat who forced Alonso and Nimmo and McNeil off this team, and I don't understand why. It's because of stuff that's off the field. It's because of politics. It's because of things that I don't really want to get into. It's because of his wife's politics and, who his wife is associated with in New York City. And that stuff is just nonsense. And whether I agree with it or disagree with it, the point is, from a team building standpoint, you think Lindor has that much power? Lindor don't have that much power. Lindor didn't make these decisions. And I want to shout out James Shiano and Draft Deck Mark over on Mets Up, because they said something similar in a show, I think last week, where it was like, we're going to find out one day, and this is kind of the first part of that Lindor is actually really sad. And a part of the reason why maybe the clubhouse is awkward and Lindor's having this really weird year is because he's got this sort of survivor's guilt where he's the only one left. All his buddies are gone. Brandon Nimmo and Pete Alonso and Jeff McNeil. And maybe he didn't get along with Jeff McNeil at first or at all, whatever. But we're going to find out one day that that was a part of it, that Lindor is just like, man, it's just me. Like, these other guys left and they kept me when we were all in this together, and it's such a bummer that we couldn't win. So now you've heard it straight from the horse's mouth with Francisco Lindor coming out and saying what he needed to say. So I think, much like the rumors of his career demise are greatly exaggerated, I think Francisco Lindor being this clubhouse cancer who has chased everybody off of this team has been a narrative perpetuated by people who don't have the media literacy that they were born with, let alone any that they developed along the way. So remember to not make these sweeping generalizations and these inferences of things that honestly don't matter, because you wouldn't care about them if the Mets were in first place right now anyway. You're only nitpicking at it because you're angry and you want to lash out. But also, it's just factually inaccurate. No player in Major League Baseball, I don't care who you are, is going to have that much weight to be like, I want all these guys off my team, and then the team just makes it happen. That's absolutely absurd. So that's the positive takeaway from an otherwise whatever article written by Mike Puma, who is a whatever sports reporter as far as I'm concerned. Baseball season is here, and now you can trade every game on Kalshi. And you know what I do? I sit down to record. Before I hit record, I pull up the Kalshi app and I see where we can find some fun, interesting value. And this one doesn't have to do with the Mets, at least not directly. It is Tarek Skubal's next team. And if you look on the Kalshi app, the LA Dodgers are trading at 39 cents a share. They are the favorites, and I think that is bad value. Okay? I like, if you go down to the second and the third teams on the list, and we'll focus on the third one now for a moment, the Tampa Bay Rays. I think that is very interesting. I think that's a little interesting proposition for you to put a little bit of latte money on, a little bit of pizza money, a little bit of lunch money. 11 cents a share means $100 will get you $855. Tampa Bay needs pitching, and they're in a unique opportunity that we will talk about in the next segment when we dive a little deeper into Tarek Skubal's market and how it affects the New York Mets. So I just think that is the fun one. Sure, you can go with the chalk. 39 cents a share. It's not terrible value, but I don't think it's as good a value, and I don't think it's as fun. So keep that in mind. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there is no house. As the probability changes, you can buy into and out of your position. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use the code FANARCHBASEBALL to get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi, trade on anything. Must be 18 and over. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risks and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. So let's talk about Tarik Skubal. Now, I mentioned that if you go on the Kalshi app, you could see that the favorites to land him are the Los Angeles Dodgers, followed by the Milwaukee Brewers, followed by the aforementioned Tampa Bay Rays. Now, according to Jeff Passan, who is the opposite of Mike Puma, he is the guy. He is the GOAT of getting things right this time of year. He said in a video he released yesterday that Tigers want to trade Skubal. The question is, can they trade Skubal? Now, somebody that good, you can always trade him. But you have to factor in two major things. If you're the Tigers, you need to find a way to cash out on this asset. You're never going to get fair value, but you have to sell your fans on something big. Think about the package that the Washington Nationals got in return for Juan Soto from the San Diego Padres a few years ago. You have to have a representative deal that looks like, at least on paper, that you fleeced the other team. That is a difficult trade to pull off, and it becomes even more difficult to pull off in season at the trade deadline. The other factor is, unlike Soto at the time, Tarik Skubal is making $30 million this year in arbitration. And so even at a prorated dollar amount, the last 2 months are going to be several millions of dollars. Now, you would think that would take teams like Milwaukee and Tampa Bay out of the running because they don't want to, and they say that they can't spend that kind of money even on a prorated deal. So the Dodgers are always going to be in the mix. I understand that. Now, look, they should have Snell and Glasnow coming back in a couple weeks, but these guys are, no pun intended, made of glass, and you don't really know what you're going to get from them once they're back, and you don't really know how long they'll be back once they are back. The Dodgers are trying to go for another World Series win. Ohtani's not pitching right now. Sasaki is doing better, but who knows with where his major league career has been to this point. So it feels like Skubal going there is the rich getting richer because of how good they've been, but I don't know if it necessarily is. I think there is a real legitimate fit there where you could argue the Dodgers need a guy like Skubal. Whereas, for instance, the Yankees, the strength of the Yankees team right now with Cam Schlittler and Garrett Cole and Rodon and Max Fried, they don't need starting pitching. To them, that would be an embarrassment of riches. The Yankees need offensive help. The Dodgers could use a little bit of help in that starting rotation. But again, I don't think it's fun and I don't think it's interesting. The interesting ones to me are Milwaukee and Tampa Bay. Milwaukee, I don't see it as much because I don't think they have the guts to make this kind of a move. But the one thing that makes me say, is can they block Tarik Skubal from going to the Dodgers? Last year, the Milwaukee Brewers finished with the best record in baseball. They were competing with the Dodgers. They're running neck and neck for the best record in the National League and in baseball with the Dodgers again this year. It would certainly go a long way to help them compete for a World Series and try to go through Los Angeles with Tarik Skubal on their team and not Tarik Skubal on the Dodgers. That is the biggest reason for them to do it. But knowing that you cannot and will not re-sign him, knowing that you're going to have to dig deep into your prospect pool to acquire him for a couple months, I just don't know if that's how they're going to operate because largely they have not operated that way in the past, save for when they traded for CC Sabathia all those years ago, but that's a generation ago now. That's a different regime. You can't even compare it. Outside of that, they haven't really made that kind of move, which brings me to the Tampa Bay Rays, who similarly were not really in the mix for players like this at the deadline, unless you believe the hype that they really tried to get Shohei Ohtani from the Angels, and Artie Moreno basically said no, and then they kept Shohei Ohtani in what was one of the dumbest, most malpractice baseball moves you could ever do, knowing that he was not going to stay with the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, which is also why Tarik Skubal needs to be traded by the Detroit Tigers, because otherwise it is malpractice. But if you look at the position that Tampa finds themselves in, it's similar to the Brewers in that they are a team that feels like they can win it all, but their path is clearer. Their path is, dare I say, easier. The American League is down. The American League is a mishmash of teams trying to compete. And now with the Yankees, with injuries to Judge and Bellinger and Stanton, yeah, they can pitch, but where's their offense going to come from? So now in a down AL, with a down AL East, with a down Yankees team, Tampa Bay doesn't even have to go through the Dodgers to get to a World Series. Now, they might have to go through them to win one, but they don't have to go through them to get to one. And that's why I think that they might do something that we've not really ever seen them do before, again, unless you believe the hype about Shohei Ohtani from a couple years ago, and that is go all in on Tarik Skubal. So I think the next few days, it's July 29th as you're watching this, I think the next few days are going to be absolutely fascinating to see who steps up and who makes a deal for Tarik Skubal. Again, going back to the Kalshi read, I think the fun money is on the Tampa Bay Rays. And that brings me to the final topic of the day, which is Freddie Peralta, who likely made his last start as a New York Met a couple days ago. We talked about that here on Mets Daily. And I think that his market may, now it may not, because there might be some different teams interested, and the Mets might find a deal that they like, and they might not want to wait out this Skubal market, which could go down to the wire. Or the Mets may want to wait it out because the team that doesn't wind up with Tarik Skubal might say, okay, we're going to pivot to Freddie Peralta. Now, I know one of these things is not like the other. No one is going to confuse Peralta with Tarik Skubal, especially the way Peralta has pitched this year. But there is Tarik Skubal, and then there's everybody else in terms of available starting pitching. And you could make the case that Freddie Peralta, stuff-wise, is at the top, or near the top at the very least, of that second bracket of starting pitchers. There's Skubal, and then there's a group of guys, Clay Holmes, Kevin Gossman. Sonny Gray's not going to get dealt now, but Sonny Gray would have been in that mix if the Red Sox, never went on that run. Maybe Sandy Alcantara, if you think he's going to get traded by Miami finally, he would probably rival Freddie Peralta for that top spot. Joe Ryan you can put into the mix. But I don't know if the Twins are going to sell on Ryan. I don't know if the Marlins are going to sell on Alcantara. I know that the Mets are going to sell Freddie Peralta. And so when you look at the available options, Peralta's market, I think, may be tied to what happens with Skubal, especially if Milwaukee makes a serious play for Skubal and swings and misses. If Milwaukee tries to get Skubal and they cannot get him, whether it is because it's too rich for their blood or whatever the case may be, another team swoops in and they never get a chance to counter offer, whatever, I think a reunion, like I mentioned on this show last week, with Freddie Peralta makes sense. They can sell it to their fan base because they could say, Freddie's our guy. Yeah, we dealt him. He's got this Mets stink on him. Don't worry about that. He was great here. He'll be great here again. We're going to go on a run. We're going to try to do this like we did last year. I think it's possible. So I don't know where this is going to go over the next couple days. None of us truly do. It's exciting. It's going to be weird. It's going to be wild. It's going to be the MLB trade deadline. And I hope, there's been a lot of reports that we're either going to see a crazy flurry of moves over the next couple days, or this trade deadline is going to peter out and die on a vine. And I hope it's the former. I hope we get some crazy flurry of moves. Now with the Mets, they've got pieces to sell anyway. So they're going to do that. Peralta and Minter and Raley and Holmes and Luis Robert Jr., maybe even Tyrone Taylor like we talked about yesterday. There are players that aren't going to be here next year that the Mets can move and will move. So the Mets are going to be active, but I hope we see one of these crazy deadlines. I hope a lot of moving parts go. I want to see Tarik Skubal moved for the sake of Major League Baseball. And we'll see. But either way, I'm going to be here with you every single step of the way. That's going to do it for this episode of Mets Daily. Once again, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, sitting at just over 4,000 subscribers, trying to get to 5,000 by the end of the 2026 season. We'd love to do it, but we'd love for you to be a part of the community as well. Until next time, I'm John Saponaro. See you tomorrow.